Elon, you already made hundreds of millions from PayPal. Why risk it all for rockets?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. It's funny, because from the outside, it probably looked insane. I mean, after PayPal, I could have just retired. I could have done nothing for the rest of my life. I could have bought an island, played video games, gone to parties, maybe built a big house and lived quietly. But honestly, that idea terrified me. Doing nothing meaningful, it's like a slow death. I think most people don't realize how quickly comfort becomes a trap. Once you stop pushing yourself, you start dying in small ways, and that's something I couldn't live with. When PayPal got acquired, I remember sitting alone one night, staring at the ceiling, thinking, what now? What's next? And all I could think about was how small we still were as a species. We had the internet, sure, we had technology that could connect the planet, but we were still stuck here, on one rock, floating in space. One asteroid, one virus, one nuclear war, and poof, humanity's gone. That didn't sit right with me. I kept thinking, if humanity is to survive long-term, we need to be a multi-planet species. We need a plan B. I wasn't trying to be a hero or anything. I just couldn't believe that no one was working on that problem seriously. NASA was scaling down, governments had lost interest in space, the excitement was gone. I thought, okay, someone has to do something. And when no one else is doing it, you eventually realize maybe that someone has to be you. It wasn't about money. It was never about money. It was about purpose. Money's fine, but it's not enough. It's like eating sugar. You get a rush, but then you crash. You can buy all the cars, all the toys, all the stuff you want, and at the end of the day, you still feel empty if there's no purpose behind it. So yeah, I took almost all of the money I made from PayPal, about $180 million, and I split it between three things: SpaceX, energy, and transportation. Each one of them could fail. In fact, most people expected them to fail. People said, "You're out of your mind. Private companies can't build rockets. You'll blow up your money literally." But I wasn't scared of failing. What scared me more was never trying. If you think about it, all the progress we've made as humans came from people who tried things that looked impossible. Airplanes, electricity, computers, all of them looked ridiculous before they worked. So when people laughed at SpaceX, I just thought, good, that means it's worth doing. When I was a kid, I used to read a lot of science fiction. I imagined a future full of space stations, colonies on Mars, flying cars. But then I grew up, and the future, it just stopped happening. The dreams of the 60s and 70s, Apollo, moon landings, all of that energy just disappeared. We got comfortable. And I didn't want to live in a world where people stopped dreaming big. So I decided to take whatever I had and bet it all on something meaningful. Of course, that sounds brave now, but back then it was terrifying. I remember the early days at SpaceX. We were working out of this small warehouse in El Segundo. A handful of engineers, second-hand machines, and a crazy idea to build reusable rockets. Nobody believed we could do it, not even some of the people I hired. But there's something beautiful about building something everyone says is impossible. It gives you this strange sense of purpose. It's like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you either learn to fly or fall to your death. There's no middle ground. People think risk is about money. It's not. Risk is emotional. It's about putting your soul on the line. It's waking up every morning knowing that everything you've built could disappear tomorrow, and doing it anyway. And the truth is, I was scared. I still get scared. People assume entrepreneurs don't feel fear. That's wrong. I feel it all the time. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else matters more. When I think about why I did it, why I risked everything, I think it's because I couldn't stand the idea of a meaningless life. We spend so much of our lives chasing comfort, chasing approval, chasing things that don't last. But when you chase something that matters, really matters, it changes you. It doesn't make you richer, at least not right away. It makes you alive. It makes every failure worth it. So yeah, I risked everything for rockets. Not because I wanted to be famous, not because I wanted to be rich, but because I wanted to wake up every day knowing that I was working on something that could actually move humanity forward. If I had stayed comfortable, maybe I'd have been happier for a while. But that kind of happiness is fragile. It disappears the moment you realize you've done nothing to make the world better. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that doing something meaningful is always harder, always riskier, but it's the only thing that lasts. So yeah, I risked everything for rockets, not because I wanted to be famous, not because I wanted to be rich, but because I wanted to wake up every day knowing that I was working on something that could actually move humanity forward. If I'd stayed comfortable, maybe I'd have been happier for a while. But that kind of happiness is fragile. It disappears the moment you realize you've done nothing to make the world better. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that doing something meaningful is always harder, always riskier, but is the only thing that lasts. So yeah, I risked everything for rockets, not because I wanted to be famous, not because I wanted to be rich, but because I wanted to wake up every day knowing that I was working on something that could actually move humanity forward. So to answer your question, why risk everything? Because everything else felt like dying slowly. People say, Elon, you're obsessed. Yeah, maybe I am. But obsession is just passion that refuses to quit. If you believe in something enough, if you know deep down it's the right thing, you don't calculate the odds. You jump. And you build your wings on the way down. That's what starting SpaceX felt like, jumping off a cliff and hoping we could make the engines work before we hit the ground. It wasn't rational, it wasn't safe, but it was real. And I think in the end, that's all that matters.
You failed 3 times in a row with SpaceX. What did that feel like?
Failure. Yeah, that word has a different meaning when you've actually lived it. When people talk about failure, they usually mean something mild, like missing a deadline or product not selling well. But when I say failure, I mean watching your dream explode in midair 3 times. And each time you don't just lose money, you lose sleep, confidence, time, pieces of your soul. The first launch, Falcon 1, we were all so excited. It was 2006, our first real shot at orbit. We'd worked for years for that moment. We were standing there on the island of Omelek in the middle of the Pacific with this beautiful rocket that represented everything we believed in. And then, 30 seconds after liftoff, it failed. I still remember the silence that followed. It wasn't just shock, it was disbelief. You don't process that kind of thing immediately. You just stare at the smoke, trying to understand what went wrong, not just technically, but cosmically. People don't realize how much emotion goes into an engineering project when you care that much. That rocket wasn't just metal, it was hope, sweat, nights without sleep. It was hundreds of people who believed we could do what no private company had done before. So when it failed, it didn't just fall from the sky, it tore a hole in something deep inside. But we didn't quit. We went back, reviewed every inch of code, every valve, every bolt. And a year later, we launched again. The second flight failed too. Different reason, same pain. And that's when doubt starts whispering in your ear. It's not loud at first. It's subtle. It says, maybe they were right. Maybe this really is impossible. But you keep going. Because what's the alternative? Giving up? To me, that was worse than failure. Then came the third flight, 2008. By that point, we were nearly out of money. We had spent almost everything, my PayPal fortune, the team's energy, our credibility. I told myself, okay, this one has to work. It just has to. We launched. Everything looked perfect. The first stage separated. We were cheering. And then, just seconds later, it happened again. The second stage collided with the first stage. Another explosion, another dream gone. That was probably the lowest point in my life. I remember flying back to Los Angeles after that third failure. I sat there on the plane, completely quiet. Not thinking about rockets or Mars or anything, just the crushing weight of reality. We had no money left. Investors were gone. The team was exhausted. I was staring at bankruptcy, not just for SpaceX, but for Tesla too. It's one thing to fail when you're alone. It's another to fail when hundreds of people have believed in you, moved across the country for you, sacrificed for you, and now you have to look them in the eye and tell them it's over. People see success and think it's linear. It's not. Success is climbing out of a crater you dug yourself, again and again, until your hands bleed. In those moments, you ask yourself very hard questions. Why am I doing this? Is it worth destroying everything for? And for me, the answer was always yes. Because this wasn't about ego or fame. It was about the future of humanity. If we couldn't make rockets work privately, we'd stay stuck, dependent on governments, and space would fade into history. Still, believing doesn't make the pain easier. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I sold my possessions. I borrowed money for rent. Imagine that. The guy who sold PayPal, borrowing money just to survive. That's the reality no one sees. I think most people would have quit then. And honestly, I wouldn't have blamed them. But sometimes when you're standing at the edge of total collapse, you see things more clearly. You realize that the only way to go is forward. So we decided to give it one more try. We scrounged together parts for a fourth launch. I told the team, we'll make this one work, or we'll die trying. That kind of desperation, it sharpens you. You stop thinking about your ego, your pride, or even your comfort. All you care about is the mission. And when Falcon 1 finally made it to orbit, September 28th, 2008, we didn't celebrate like billionaires. We celebrated like survivors. People cried. I cried. It wasn't joy. It was relief. 3 failures, 1 success. And that one success saved everything. NASA saw it and gave us a contract. And that contract literally kept SpaceX alive. Without it, there would be no Falcon 9, no Dragon, no Starship. It was the difference between death and life for the company. When I look back, those failures were the best education I ever got. They taught me humility, resilience, and focus. They showed me that if you're not failing enough, you're not pushing hard enough. But it's not romantic. Failure hurts. It breaks people. And the only reason I survived it is because I refused to let fear make decisions for me. There's a line I keep telling people. If something is important enough, you should try, even if the probable outcome is failure. That's not bravado. That's math. Because if no one tries, the probability of success is exactly zero. If even one person tries, there's a chance. And sometimes, one chance is all you need. When people say you're lucky, I say maybe. But luck only matters when you're still in the game. And staying in the game after failing 3 times is the hardest part. So what did it feel like to fail? It felt like drowning while pretending to be calm. It felt like holding your breath for years, waiting for a miracle. But the moment you rise above that water, even for a second, every scar, every sleepless night, every explosion, it all becomes worth it. Because that's when you realize failure doesn't define you. Persistence does.
After losing money, facing bankruptcy, and almost everything going wrong, what kept you going when everyone told you to stop?
That's a good question. And honestly, I've thought about that a lot. Because there were times when stopping would have made perfect sense. Rationally, it was the smart move. Emotionally, it would have saved me a lot of pain. But the thing is, I never started SpaceX or Tesla because it was rational. I started them because they mattered. When I was a kid in South Africa, I used to read a lot of science fiction. The Foundation, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Star Wars. Those stories painted a version of humanity that explored, created, and built beyond its limits. I wanted that world to exist. And as I grew older, I looked around and realized nobody was really building it. Governments had stopped dreaming big. Companies just wanted profit. And I thought, if no one's going to do it, then maybe I should at least try. So when people said stop, I heard the future doesn't need you. And I couldn't accept that. There were nights, especially in 2008, when I'd sit alone in my office at Tesla or SpaceX, same laptop, 2 collapsing companies, same person trying to save both. I'd get these messages from friends or even my own team members saying, Elon, maybe you should take a break. Maybe you should cut your losses. They weren't wrong, but they didn't see what I saw. To me, SpaceX wasn't just a rocket company. It was the seed of something that could keep humanity alive if we ever faced extinction. And Tesla wasn't just about cars. It was about accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. How do you stop something like that? You don't. You can't. When your purpose is bigger than your pain, quitting stops being an option. But let me be honest, I wasn't fearless. There were nights I'd wake up sweating, thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just delusional. And then I'd remember why I started. You see, people assume that motivation is like a fire that burns constantly. It's not. It flickers. It fades. What matters is whether you protect it when it gets weak. I kept knowing because I believed, even if I failed, someone else would pick up the pieces and continue the mission. Maybe another kid would see what we tried to do and think, hey, they almost made it. Maybe I can finish it. That thought kept me alive more times than I can count. I also had incredible people around me. Gwen Shotwell, our COO at SpaceX, one of the strongest people I've ever met. J.B. Straubel at Tesla, brilliant, calm, the kind of guy who can find light in any chaos. You don't survive failure alone. You survive because others refuse to give up on you. But still, there's something deeper, something primal. When you're building something world-changing, it becomes part of your identity. If SpaceX failed, it wasn't just the company dying, it was me dying with it. And yet, paradoxically, that's what gave me strength. Because when you stop fearing failure, when you've already lost everything once, you become unstoppable. I remember one night, after the third failed launch, I was outside the SpaceX factory. Everyone had gone home. I was staring at this half-assembled rocket just sitting there in silence. And I thought, even if this is the last thing I do, at least I tried. That moment of acceptance, it was liberating. Because once you accept that you might lose everything, you stop being owned by fear. You know, people think success is about being confident. It's not. It's about being persistent when you're not confident at all. It's easy to work hard when you believe things will work out. The real test is whether you keep working when you're almost sure they won't. So what kept me going? Honestly, a mix of duty, obsession, and love. Duty because I felt responsible to the engineers and dreamers who joined me. Obsession because I couldn't stop thinking about rockets even when I wanted to. And love because I genuinely love humanity, even when it frustrates me. People misunderstand me sometimes. They think I built rockets for ego. But if ego was my goal, I'd have stopped after PayPal. That was easy money. SpaceX and Tesla were suffering. They were painful. I did them because I couldn't imagine a world where we stop reaching for the stars. And let me tell you something. I don't romanticize struggle. I hate losing. I hate seeing people cry after a failed launch. But I love what those moments teach you. When everything burns down, you discover who you really are. You realize what matters. And what matters? It's not the money, the fame, or the tweets. It's the mission, the purpose, the people who believed when no one else did. So yeah, people told me to stop. And maybe if I was a little smarter, I would have. But if I did, we wouldn't have landed rockets today. We wouldn't have sent astronauts to the ISS. We wouldn't have inspired thousands of kids to believe in space again. Sometimes, the right decision isn't the rational one. It's the one that lets you sleep at night knowing you gave everything you had. When I look back, what kept me going wasn't some grand motivational speech or a vision board. It was a stubborn belief that giving up would be worse than failure. And that's something I'd tell anyone chasing a dream. There will come a moment when everyone, investors, friends, even your family, will tell you to stop. You'll be broke, tired, alone, and in that silence, you'll have one choice: to believe in your purpose or believe in your fear. I chose purpose. And that's why SpaceX still exists.
Looking back now, with everything you've risked and lost along the way, do you ever regret choosing this path?
Regret. That's a tricky word. People assume that if you achieve something big, you stop having regrets. But that's not true. You just learn to live with a different kind of regret, the kind that comes from knowing what it cost you. If I'm being honest, yeah, sometimes I do think about it. Not in the sense that I wish I'd done something else, more in the sense of, did I pay too much for this? There's this misconception that people like me enjoy the chaos, that we thrive on pressure, on risk, on living at the edge of collapse. But that's not it. I never wanted to live like that. I just couldn't walk away. I've lost relationships because of this path. I've lost time with my kids. I've missed birthdays, milestones, simple moments that I'll never get back. There were years when my entire life was just work and exhaustion, sleeping on the factory floor, showering at the SpaceX office, eating cold pizza at 2 a.m. because there was no time for anything else. And sometimes, when the world's quiet, late at night, after a launch or a product event, that's when it hits you. You start wondering, was it worth it? I think every entrepreneur who's truly obsessed with something goes through that. You start with this dream of changing the world, and you don't realize how much of yourself you'll have to give up to do it. So yeah, sometimes I regret how much it's taken. But then I think about what we've built, what we've proven possible, and it's hard to regret that. Because I genuinely believe if humanity is to survive long term, we need to be a multiplanetary species. It's not a slogan for me. It's not marketing. It's a necessity. And if SpaceX didn't exist, I don't think anyone else would be seriously pursuing it at the same pace. NASA's incredible, but they move differently, and they have to. Private industry can take risks that governments can't. So, do I regret the path? No. Do I regret parts of the journey? Absolutely. I regret not being there more for my kids when they were younger. I regret how much stress I put on the people I love. I regret how often I forgot to breathe, to enjoy life, to just exist. There's a price to building things at this scale, and it's not measured in dollars, it's measured in people, in time, in peace of mind. Sometimes when people call me a genius or a visionary, I kind of laugh inside, because genius doesn't feel like this. It feels like constant doubt, constant pressure, constant trade-offs. If I could go back in time and talk to my younger self, I think I'd say, it's going to work. You'll make it. But it's going to hurt more than you think. I'd still tell him to do it. Because pain, when it has meaning, is bearable. But I'd also tell him to slow down sometimes, to take a walk, to hug people more, to be human, not just the machine building the future. People sometimes forget that behind all the rockets and cars and AI, there's just a guy who's been running on caffeine and adrenaline for 2 decades, trying not to disappoint humanity. When you become the face of something this big, you lose the right to be ordinary. You can't have a breakdown. You can't disappear for a month. You have to keep going, because millions of people are watching, expecting. That weight, it doesn't leave you. You just get stronger carrying it. And yet, despite all that, I wouldn't trade it. Because the alternative, a life of comfort, of safety, of mediocrity, that would have felt worse. I've always said I'd rather die on Mars than live a meaningless life on Earth. That's not a soundbite. That's just how I'm wired. It's weird, I don't really enjoy success the way people expect. When something works, I don't celebrate for long. My mind just goes to the next challenge. It's not about satisfaction, it's about survival. But there are moments, small ones, like when I see kids wearing SpaceX shirts, or when an engineer tells me they joined because they watched one of our launches when they were 10. Those moments remind me why I chose this path. Because this was never about me. It was about lighting a spark in others, in the world. Sometimes I think about what the world will be like 100 years from now, Maybe people will walk on Mars like it's normal. Maybe they'll look back and say, there was this crazy guy who thought we could get here. If that happens, if humanity becomes a spacefaring civilization, then all the sleepless nights, all the failures, all the losses, they'll make sense. So, do I regret it? No, but I understand it now. I understand that every dream comes with a cost, and the bigger the dream, the higher the price. You can't build rockets to Mars and expect an easy life. You can't chase impossible goals and still live like everyone else. You sacrifice parts of yourself, not because you want to, but because that's what the dream demands. And at the end of the day, when I look at the stars, I feel peace. Because I know I tried. I didn't just talk about what humanity could be. I did everything I could to make it real. And maybe that's all any of us can really hope for. Not a perfect life. Not an easy one. But one where, when it's over, you can say, I tried to build something that mattered. So, no. I don't regret the path. But I respect the price.
You've built so much, inspired so many. But what if, in the end, SpaceX fails? What if the dream doesn't survive you?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? What if it all ends? What if after everything, SpaceX fails? You know, sometimes late at night, I think about that. Not in a dramatic way, just realistically. Because nothing lasts forever. Not companies, not people, not even civilizations if you look at history. So yeah, SpaceX could fail. Maybe tomorrow, maybe 50 years from now. And that's okay. What matters is why we tried. People think success is about permanence, about creating something that lasts forever. But I think real success is about momentum, about moving the needle of human progress forward, even if only a little bit. If SpaceX were to collapse tomorrow, it wouldn't mean the dream was wrong. It would mean that for a brief moment in history, a bunch of people decided to try something impossible and got further than anyone thought they could. And that matters. If we fail, someone else will continue. That's how progress works. If the Wright brothers had crashed and given up, someone else would have built airplanes. If Tesla Motors had died, someone else would have made electric cars mainstream. Because once an idea enters the collective mind, it doesn't die. It just waits for the next person brave enough to chase it. So yeah, if SpaceX fails, I'll be sad. But I won't be ashamed. Because we've already changed what people believe is possible. We proved that a private company could build rockets, land them, reuse them, send astronauts to orbit. We've lowered the cost of access to space by orders of magnitude. That's not failure. That's legacy. And if someone else learns from our mistakes and goes further, then our failure becomes their foundation. But let's imagine the worst-case scenario. SpaceX disappears. What then? Well, the dream doesn't disappear. The idea of becoming a multiplanetary species is bigger than SpaceX, bigger than me. It's a direction for humanity, a compass pointing outward. You can destroy the ship, but not the horizon. So if SpaceX fails, I hope people don't just mourn it. I hope they build again. I hope some kid watching our launches today grows up and says, I'll finish what they started. That's all I really want. You see, for me, SpaceX was never just about rockets. It was about courage, about proving that individuals, not just governments or massive institutions, can shape the future. And even if the company ends one day, the courage stays. It gets recycled into new dreams. Sometimes I think that's why failure exists. It's not the end of the story. It's the handoff to the next generation. I mean, think about it. Every major leap humanity's made came from someone's failure. The first steam engines exploded. The first airplanes crashed. The first computers filled entire rooms and barely worked. But those failures became stepping stones. So if SpaceX fails, maybe our wreckage becomes the blueprint for the next great leap. That's not tragedy. That's evolution. But let me be clear, I don't plan to fail. We fight every single day to make this work. Every launch, every prototype, every explosion. It's all part of figuring out how to survive out there, beyond Earth. Still, I've made peace with the possibility of failure. Because if the dream is impossible, then failure is inevitable at some point. But that's fine. Impossible things only become possible because someone was willing to fail for them. People sometimes ask, aren't you afraid of losing everything? And I tell them, I've already lost everything before. It's not that bad. Failure doesn't scare me anymore. Stagnation does. A world that stops trying, that's terrifying to me. A civilization that looks at the stars and says, too hard? That's failure on a cosmic scale. So yeah, if SpaceX fails, the spirit behind it can't die. Because it's not just a company, it's a question. A question we've asked since the dawn of time. Can we go further? As long as that question exists, so will the people willing to answer it. When I was younger, I thought success would mean peace. That once we made it to orbit or landed a booster, I'd finally relax. But success is just another mountain. You climb one, and you see 10 more. If SpaceX fails, it'll hurt. I'll probably cry honestly. I'm not made of metal. But I'd rather cry after trying than live comfortably after doing nothing. There's a quote I like. I think it's from Churchill. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. That's SpaceX in one line. Maybe that's humanity too. We fall, we rebuild, we try again. Over and over, until something finally works. So what if SpaceX fails? Then someone else will succeed. And when they do, I'll be the first one cheering. Because the mission was never about me. It was never about ego or credit. It was always about one thing: ensuring that the light of consciousness continues beyond this small blue planet. If we can achieve that even slightly, if we can inspire enough people to dream about Mars, about the stars, about something bigger than themselves, then we've already succeeded. I think about the last human alive on Earth someday, looking up at the night sky. If that person can look up and see a tiny dot on Mars and say, we made it there, then it was all worth it. So yes, SpaceX could fail, but humanity won't. Not if we keep trying. And maybe that's the point. Maybe failure isn't the opposite of success. Maybe it's just the price we pay for progress. And if that's the price of impossible dreams, I'll pay it. Every time.